The story begins with a building most people would pass without ever knowing its name. Weather-worn brick, boarded windows, and a rusty marquee that still clings to a few crooked letters, like broken teeth spelling a name that once carried excitement. Amberwick Theater. It sits at the corner of an unremarkable street in rural Indiana, its presence more echo than structure. To the untrained eye, it looks like another abandoned relic of a forgotten town. But to the people who grew up near it, it is a landmark of fear, memory, and unanswered questions. The air around it always feels heavier than it should, even in the bright wash of summer afternoons. The vines curling up its frame are not just plants reclaiming matter. They feel like hands closing over a mouth that has tried too long to speak. The theater has learned to keep quiet. After 50 years, it still holds something inside, something unspoken, something unreturned. The building was once the pride of Redfield, an intimate town theater with velvet curtains, polished floors, and a screen that glowed like a small window to other worlds. Locals say the theater felt alive in its prime, humming with anticipation on Saturday nights, laughter echoing through its halls, its walls warm from the proximity of dreaming bodies. A place where first dates blossomed into lifelong marriages, where families shared popcorn and smiles, and where dark seats felt strangely safe. But buildings change when the stories inside them sour. There's a tale that every child in Redfield eventually hears. One summer night in 1973, a young woman stepped into theater for a midnight film and never stepped back out. Her name was Anna Ward, and her disappearance marked the beginning of the theater's slow descent into stillness. Over time, the people stopped coming, the screen stopped flickering, and the doors locked themselves, almost involuntarily, like a body curling around its wound. They say the last film it ever showed was never meant to be seen again. For decades, the theater sat untouched. Storms battered its roof. Winters froze its bones. Yet the structure refused to collapse. It lingered, as though suspended in time, a monument to something incomplete. When the wind blew through its limp signboard, it made a whistling tone, long and low, like someone breathing from behind a wall. Locals rarely approached it. Some claimed that if you stood close, you could hear the projector running, though the building had no electricity. Others swore they saw a movement in the upper balcony, a lone silhouette seated as if waiting. Even in broad daylight, the theater seemed to cast a shadow deeper than any the sun could produce. Fears inherited in small towns. So is reverence. The Amberwick Theater was both. If you asked people why no one demolished it, they would shrug and give contradictory answers. Some believed the theater was protected by law. Others whispered that the land was cursed, that bulldozers would malfunction if they tried. Most simply said the same sentence, always with the same hushed resignation. It's better to leave it alone. But the truth is never satisfied with silence. It returns in pieces, like stray leaves carried back by the wind. Recently, a discovery has stirred the dust. Inside a projection booth, hidden behind a false wall, a box was found, metal rusted but carefully sealed. Inside were several old film reels, unmarked except for faint, handwritten codes that looked improvised rather than official. The reels date to 1973. The same night Anna vanished. The footage they carry has waited 50 years in darkness. And though the town has tried for half a century to move on, to bury the memory beneath time and routine, the reels pull everything back into focus. They reveal not just a story of a missing girl, but something more, something that changes the narrative from tragedy to haunting. The camera captures details that no one remembered, angles that shouldn't have been possible, and moments that suggest the night was not random, not accidental, and not entirely human. Before the footage resurfaced, Anna's disappearance was a story told in soft tones over dinner tables, fireside whispers, and schoolyard dares. A mystery with no evidence, no closure. Some said she slipped out the side door to meet someone. Others believed she never existed. But every version of the tale ended with a single uncomfortable truth. No one saw her leave. The building holds that memory like a bruise. To understand what the footage shows, you must first understand the feeling of the theater itself. Imagine stepping inside, dust motes floating in pale beams of light, filtering through cracks in the boarded windows. Seats shaped by thousands of bodies, each cushion sagging slightly with memory. The velvet curtains still hang, though stiff with age. Their red now dulled into the color of dried blood. The air smells of mold, metal, and something sweeter, something faintly reminiscent of old perfume. And then, deeper in the silence, beneath the everyday sounds of decay, there is an underlying pulse. Not loud, not definable, just a presence. Like the theater hasn't forgotten the moment when time paused, when a life was swallowed whole. History lingers in physical spaces, especially those built for watching. A theater is a vessel for attention, where strangers gather in shared darkness, eyes fixed on a single glowing frame. Something about that night in 1973 disrupted that boundary between audience and screen. Something watched back. No one knew that was possible. Until now, with the reels uncovered, the past is wide awake again, and people who once buried their memories begin to speak. The town, which once treated the story like a wound to be ignored, now feels something stir beneath its floorboards. Old tensions resurface. Because the footage doesn't simply record what happened. It raises questions that cut deeper than disappearance. Did Anna leave willingly? Was someone guiding her? Was the theater merely a backdrop? Or something more active? And most unsettling of all, why would someone film her final moments? There are places in this world that seem ordinary but are not. Places where memory lingers like a stain, where stories refuse to decay, where truth waits patiently under layers of dust. Amberwick Theater is one of them. The footage has finally been brought into light, but what it reveals is not comfort. It is invitation. An invitation to look closer, to revisit a night long abandoned, to unravel a truth that was never meant to sleep, because the moment Anna vanished was not the end. It was only the beginning. The story begins with a building most people would pass without ever knowing its name. Weather-worn brick, boarded windows, and a rusty marquee that still clings to a few crooked letters, like broken teeth spelling a name that once carried excitement. Amberwick Theater. It sits at the corner of an unremarkable street in rural Indiana, its presence more echo than structure. To the untrained eye, it looks like another abandoned relic of a forgotten town. But to the people who grew up near it, it is a landmark of fear, memory, and unanswered questions. The air around it always feels heavier than it should, even in the bright wash of summer afternoons. The vines curling up its frame are not just plants reclaiming matter. They feel like hands closing over a mouth that has tried too long to speak. The theater has learned to keep quiet. After 50 years, it still holds something inside, something unspoken, something unreturned. The building was once the pride of Redfield, an intimate town theater with velvet curtains, polished wood floors, and a screen that glowed like a small window to other worlds. Locals say the theater felt alive in its prime, humming with anticipation on Saturday nights, laughter echoing through its halls, its walls warm from the proximity of dreaming bodies. A place where first dates blossomed into lifelong marriages, where families shared popcorn and smiles, and where dark seats felt strangely safe. But buildings change when the stories inside them sour. There is a tale that every child in Redfield eventually hears. One summer night in 1973, a young woman stepped into the theater for a midnight film and never stepped back out. Her name was Anna Ward, and her disappearance marked the beginning of the theater's slow descent into stillness. Over time, the people stopped coming, the screen stopped flickering, and the doors locked themselves, almost involuntarily, like a body curling around its wound. They say the last film it ever showed was never meant to be seen again. For decades, the theater sat untouched. Storms battered its roof. Winters froze its bones. Yet the structure refused to collapse. It lingered, as though suspended in time, a monument to something incomplete. When the wind blew through its limp signboard, it made a whistling tone, long and low, like someone breathing from behind a wall. Locals rarely approached it. Some claimed that if you stood close, you could hear the projector running, though the building had no electricity. Others swore they saw movement in the upper balcony, a lone silhouette seated as if waiting. Even in broad daylight, the theater seemed to cast a shadow deeper than any the sun could produce. Fears inherited in small towns. So is reverence. The Amberwick Theater was both. If you asked people why no one demolished it, they would shrug and give contradictory answers. Some believed the theater was protected by law. Others whispered that the land was cursed, that bulldozers would malfunction if they tried. Most simply said the same sentence, always with the same hushed resignation. It's better to leave it alone. But the truth is never satisfied with silence. It returns in pieces, like stray leaves carried back by the wind. Recently, a discovery has stirred the dust. Inside the projection booth, hidden behind a false wall, a box was found, metal rusted but carefully sealed. Inside were several old film reels, unmarked except for faint, handwritten codes that looked improvised rather than official. The reels date to 1973, the same night Anna vanished. The footage they carry has waited 50 years in darkness. And though the town has tried for half a century to move on, to bury the memory beneath time and routine, the reels pull everything back into focus. They reveal not just the story of a missing girl, but something more, something that changes the narrative from tragedy to haunting. The camera captures details that no one remembered, angles that shouldn't have been possible, and moments that suggest the night was not random, not accidental, and not entirely human. Before the footage resurfaced, Anna's disappearance was a story told in soft tones over dinner tables, fireside whispers, and schoolyard dares. A mystery with no evidence, no closure. Some said she slipped out the side door to meet someone. Others believed she never existed. But every version of the tale ended with a single uncomfortable truth. No one saw her leave. The building holds that memory like a bruise. To understand what the footage shows, you must first understand the feeling of the theater itself. Imagine stepping inside, dust motes floating in pale beams of light, filtering through cracks in the boarded windows. Seats shaped by thousands of bodies, each cushion sagging slightly with memory. The velvet curtains still hang, though stiff with age. Their red now dulled into the color of dried blood. The air smells of mold, metal, and something sweeter, something faintly reminiscent of old perfume. And then, deeper in the silence, beneath the everyday sounds of decay, there's an underlying pulse. Not loud, not definable, just a presence. Like the theater hasn't forgotten the moment when time paused, when a life was swallowed whole. History lingers in physical spaces, especially those built for watching. A theater is a vessel for attention, where strangers gather in shared darkness, eyes fixed on a single glowing frame. Something about that night in 1973 disrupted that boundary between audience and screen. Something watched back. No one knew that was possible. Until now, with the reels uncovered, the past is wide awake again. And people who once buried their memories begin to speak. The town, which once treated the story like a wound to be ignored, now feels something stir beneath its floorboards. Old tensions resurface. Because the footage doesn't simply record what happened. It raises questions that cut deeper than disappearance. Did Anna leave willingly? Was someone guiding her? Was the theater merely a backdrop? Or something more active? And most unsettling of all, why would someone film her final moments? There are places in this world that seem ordinary but are not. Places where memory lingers like a stain, where stories refuse to decay, where truth waits patiently under layers of dust. Amberwick Theater is one of them. The footage has finally been brought into light, but what it reveals is not comfort. It is invitation. An invitation to look closer, to revisit a night long abandoned, to unravel a truth that was never meant to sleep, because the moment Anna vanished was not the end. It was only the beginning. June 16, 1973, began like any other humid summer day in Redfield, Indiana. The cicadas were restless, the air thick with the smell of freshly cut grass, gasoline, and soft rain that never fully fell. By evening, the heat still clung stubbornly to the sidewalks, shimmering beneath the street lamps. But despite the heavy air, there was a quiet excitement brewing across town. The Amberwick Theater was reopening its doors, for one night only, for a special midnight screening. No one knew exactly why. The owner, an aging man named Charles Amberwick, had announced the showing just a week earlier. He'd been reclusive for years, rarely seen outside his home. But the promise of an exclusive thriller film, rumored to be imported from Europe and shown only once, was enough to draw a crowd. People were curious, eager for something new to punctuate the monotony of small-town life. The line formed early outside the theater. Some came for the novelty. others simply because there was nothing else to do on a Saturday night. Groups of teenagers clustered on the sidewalk, cracking jokes and whispering about the rumors surrounding the film. Couples held hands, leaning into one another as the dusk deepened. A few older locals, nostalgic for theater's golden days, waited quietly, their faces lit by the flicker of nearby neon signs. The theater's interior still held traces of its former elegance. The grand chandelier, dusty but intact, cast dim reflections on red velvet walls. A faint scent of popcorn lingered in the air, mixed with something older, like the smell of forgotten curtains and last century's perfume. The wooden floors creaked beneath cautious steps. The seats sagged with age. But none of this mattered. For one night, Amberwick was breathing again. Among the crowd that night was 19-year-old Anna Ward. She arrived alone, carrying a small leather-bound camera bag. The camera, her constant companion, hung from a strap around her neck. Anna had always been an observer, more comfortable watching the world through a lens and participating in it. She was studying photography at a college 2 hours away, but had returned home for summer break. Her presence didn't go unnoticed. People in Redfield never forgot a face, especially one that carried quiet gravity. Anna wasn't the type who needed to be accompanied. She sat a few rows from the back, close enough to capture the atmosphere, but far enough to remain unnoticed. She photographed everything: audience members settling into their seats, the ornate lights, the dusty curtains. She always said photographs revealed the things people didn't see, the truths hidden beneath the surface. The film began shortly after midnight. The lights dimmed. The projector hummed to life. A hush fell over the room. The opening scene was slow, abstract. Shadows whispered voices. A lone figure walking through an empty hallway. It wasn't a typical thriller, but something more psychological, more experimental. Some found it strange, others intriguing. Anna seemed transfixed, her eyes reflecting the flickering light. The crowd settled into a quiet rhythm. Shifting feet, soft whispers, the occasional crinkle of candy wrappers. Outside, a distant thunder rumbled across the sky, though no rain fell. The air felt heavy, as if the night itself were holding its breath. Halfway through the screening, the atmosphere changed. At first, it was subtle, a brief flicker in projector light, a sputter in the audio. People glanced at each other, unsure if it was part of the film. The projector faltered again, this time more noticeably. The screen dimmed, brightened, then faded into darkness. A nervous wave rippled through the audience. Someone laughed awkwardly. Someone else muttered that the old building finally gave up. Then the power cut out entirely. The theater plunged into blackness. For a moment, there was only silence. Pure, absolute silence. Not even a whisper. Then, quietly, came the sound of movement. Soft footsteps near the stage. A rustle behind the curtains. Someone in the audience gasped. A few people called out, asking if everything was all right, joking to hide their nerves. But their voices carried strangely in the darkness, swallowed rather than echoed. A thin emergency light flickered to life near the exit, casting faint illumination across the room. Shadows stretched, warped, clinging to the walls. People squinted, adjusting to the low light. Someone near the front swore they saw a figure standing behind the screen. Just a silhouette, tall, motionless. When they blinked, it seemed to have shifted slightly, as if it were breathing. A couple of teenagers whispered that it was part of the show. Others weren't so sure. Anna was still in her seat, but those who remembered the night recalled seeing her turn her head, as if she heard something no one else did. She placed a hand on her camera, not protected, but to hold it ready. Her movements were slow, intentional. The projector sputtered again, briefly flashing a distorted image across the screen. Grainy white noise, then a blurred figure. It was unclear whether the image belonged to the film or something else. The sound crackled like a distant whisper. Then, without warning, the lights returned. But Anna was no longer in her seat. At first, no one noticed. The film resumed, continuing where it left off, though many struggled to refocus on the plot. But soon murmurs began. Someone pointed to her empty seat, her bag still resting on the floor, her coat draped neatly over the back, her camera, too valuable for her to ever leave behind. dangled untouched. People assumed she had gone to the restroom or stepped out for air. Minutes passed. Then more. The film kept playing, but attention shifted. A young couple got up to check the halls. A friend of Anna's, one of the few who recognized her from town, stood, concern tightening her features. Her absence began to feel wrong. When the film ended, a strange quiet filled the room. The audience rose slowly, whispering. Some called her name. Others shrugged, confused but eager to leave. But when her belongings remained untouched, fear settled in. The theater manager unlocked the restroom. No one inside. Staff checked the lobby. Empty. The exits, still watched by a few lingering moviegoers, had not seen her pass. Anna had simply vanished. Her camera remained, film still loaded. A group of people stayed behind to search. Flashlights cut through the shadows backstage, over dusty ropes, old props, forgotten storage rooms. The air back there smelled stale, colder than the rest of the theater. Nothing. No one remembered seeing Anna stand. No one saw her walk away. She had been there one moment and gone the next, disappearing into the same darkness that had swallowed the screen. Some would later swear they heard her voice during the blackout, a faint hum, like someone singing to themselves. Others claimed they saw her figure near the curtains, stepping toward the screen rather than away from it. But memory is fragile, especially when fear binds it. What people recall is often reconstruction, a shadow of truth stitched together by longing or dread. All anyone knew that night was this. She entered the theater. She sat in her seat. The lights went out, and when they returned, she was gone. Her absence was quiet, almost gentle. No scream, no struggle, just nothing. The film kept playing. Life kept moving. But something had shifted. In the days to come, that moment would become the fulcrum upon which Redfield's sense of safety balanced. The theater, once a place of shared dreams, became a symbol of something unexplainable. The night had offered no warning. Only a question. How does someone disappear from a room full of people without being seen? Some mysteries roar. Others whisper. This one vanished in silence. The last confirmed sighting of the teen remains one of the most unsettling and confusing parts of the case. Multiple witnesses reported seeing her near the local highway, roughly an hour after she was supposed to arrive home. The location itself was odd, far from her usual route, surrounded by thick patches of woods, broken fences, and nearly abandoned barns. According to one witness, the girl appeared dazed, as if she didn't fully understand where she was. She was seen walking along the shoulder of the road, clutching her school bag, and occasionally glancing over her shoulder, as if someone was following her. Another driver passing by later claimed she saw a rusted blue pickup truck trailing slowly behind a teenager. The description of the truck varied from person to person. Some insisted it was blue, others thought dark green, but all agreed it looked old, dented, and had only one working headlight. Locals whispered about that truck for years. Some believed it belonged to a farmer living miles away. Others insisted it belonged to an unknown stranger who had been spotted several times near schools, parks, and markets. Yet no official record of the truck, or its driver, was ever found. Investigators searched the area where she was last seen. Dogs were brought in, and for a brief moment, there was hope. The dogs caught her scent near a small creek running parallel to the road. But just before the trail deepened into the woods, the scent vanished completely. Either she was lifted off the ground, placed in a vehicle, or something happened that made her untraceable from that point onward. Then came the strangest clue of all. Several students and one teacher recalled noticing her acting differently the day she disappeared. She looked anxious, kept checking her watch, and seemed distracted during class. At lunch, she avoided her usual friends, choosing to sit alone by the window. One friend remembered asking her if everything was okay, to which she replied, "I just need to go home. Something's wrong." But she never explained what. The final odd detail involved an anonymous phone call received by her parents 2 days after her disappearance. The caller didn't speak. Only the sound of heavy breathing and what sounded faintly like screaming or wind could be heard. The call lasted about 20 seconds before abruptly cutting off. Police traced the call, and it led to a payphone 20 miles away, near an abandoned gas station that had been shut down for years. When investigators searched the area around the payphone, they found nothing. No footprints, no tire tracks, no personal belongings. Just silence. To this day, the last sighting of the teen and the clues surrounding it have left more questions than answers. Was she running from someone? Following someone she trusted? Or did something supernatural intervene? Whatever the truth is, the trail from that moment onward grew cold, frozen in time, sealed in whispers, and buried beneath rumors that still haunt Michigan decades later. The investigation into the teen's disappearance began with urgency, but very quickly, it twisted into a nightmare of false leads, silence, and deep frustration. When the girl didn't return home that evening, her parents initially assumed she had stayed late with friends. But as night fell, the unease grew. They called everyone they could think of, friends, teachers, neighbors, but no one had seen her since she left school. By midnight, panic had consumed the family, and the authorities were notified. Police arrived early the next morning. Officers interviewed classmates and teachers, who repeated similar observations. She looked nervous that day, distracted and unusually quiet. Investigators searched the school grounds, nearby houses, bus stops, and parks, but found nothing unusual. Her locker contained only routine belongings, textbooks, notes, and an unfinished letter she had been writing. The letter was strange. It didn't mention names, only phrases like, "I don't know who to trust. I have to be careful. If something happens, please forgive me." Her parents insisted they knew nothing about these concerns. Meanwhile, police traced her walk home. The initial half of her route showed no disturbances. Then, as they reached the remote stretch where she was last seen, investigators noticed tire marks on the dirt shoulder, deep, uneven, and abruptly angled toward the woods. Some believed it indicated a vehicle had stopped suddenly. Despite searches with dogs, drones, and volunteers, no further trace emerged. Rumors began spreading throughout the community. Some whispered about a strange man seen near the school weeks earlier. Others mentioned a janitor who had suddenly quit and left town the same day she vanished. Police questioned him, but with no evidence, he was released. Days turned into weeks, and yet only confusion remained. Each potential clue dissolved into nothing. Then came a chilling development. Several residents claimed to have seen a truck similar to the one described by witnesses, an old, rusted pickup, parked at odd hours near neighborhoods and farmland. But whenever someone tried to approach it, the vehicle sped away. The investigation hit dead end after dead end. No fingerprints. No witnesses willing to speak. No physical evidence connecting anyone to the case. For a small Michigan town, the atmosphere grew suffocating. Schools were placed on alert. Parents refused to let their children walk alone. Community meetings were filled with fear and frustration as police assured everyone they were doing everything possible. Yet beneath that reassurance, detectives were growing desperate. It was as if the girl had simply vanished. The lack of progress, the silence, and the eerie clues created an overwhelming sense that something much larger and much darker was unfolding beneath the surface. No one knew where she was. No one knew who took her. And worst of all, no one knew if she was still alive. Weeks passed with no breakthroughs. The case was already losing momentum when a quiet, almost accidental discovery shifted everything. A connection to an old theater on the edge of town. It began when a retired mailman came forward. He told detectives he had seen the missing teen several times near the abandoned Royal Crest Theater, once vibrant, now decaying. According to him, she often loitered near the entrance, sitting alone on the crumbling steps as though waiting for someone. His recollections startled investigators. The theater had been closed for years after a fire that damaged its main hall. Now, teenagers whisper about it being haunted, a place where shadows moved even when no one was inside. Detectives followed up reluctantly. Many believe it was merely another dead end. But the deeper they explored, the stranger became. Inside the theater, dust coated everything, thick and undisturbed, except for a single trail of footprints leading from the back entrance toward the old projection room. The footprints were small, possibly matching the missing girl's shoe size. In the projection room, they found something more troubling. A chair placed directly before a projection window, as if someone had been watching the empty stage below. A glass soda bottle sat beside it, Fresh, not dusty. Someone had been there recently. As they searched further, officers discovered a narrow staircase descending beneath the projection booth. It led to a hidden basement level that had never been included on public records. The space smelled of mold and old wood. Shelves were filled with unlabeled film reels, some broken, others sealed in rusting metal canisters. Most disturbing was a small room at the far end. Its only contents, a mattress on the floor, a metal bucket, and a faded sweater that seemed to match the one the girl was last seen wearing. The family was shown the garment. The mother collapsed, whispering through tears as she had folded that sweater just days before the disappearance. Speculation grew that someone had used the abandoned theater as a hiding place, or a prison. The town's fear deepened. What was happening inside that place? Who controlled it? And was the missing girl ever there willingly? Detectives ordered the reels to be transported and reviewed, but the equipment needed to play them was outdated. The tapes were fragile, deteriorating. Tech specialists warned that restoring them could take time. But before any analysis could begin, an unexpected twist rattled the entire investigation. The basement room was found cleared out the very next day. The mattress, bucket, sweater, gone. No forced entry. No signs of struggle. It was as though someone had known the police were there, someone who returned silently while the town slept. And just like that, the investigation collided with something more chilling than before, a presence that was always one step ahead. While investigators scrambled to understand who had accessed the theater after they had, another revelation cracked the case open, then pushed into even darker territory. The film reels retrieved from the hidden basement were sent to Indianapolis for restoration. Most were warped or partially melted, likely from heat and moisture. Weeks passed without news. Families and residents tried to move on, though the girl's parents refused to abandon hope. Then, late one evening, the lead detective received a call. One of the reels had been successfully stabilized, and its contents were disturbing. The footage began innocently enough. Empty hallways of the Royal Crest Theater, panned slowly as if someone were documenting the abandoned space. The angle was steady, suggesting a tripod or practice hand. Dusty seats, torn curtains, a stage left frozen in disuse. But then, the frame jolted. It cut to the basement staircase. The camera descended unevenly, breathing audible behind it. Slow, controlled, as though the person filming wanted each step captured. When it reached the basement, the footage turned to the small room that investigators later found empty. Back then, it was not empty. A mattress lay on the floor. A metal bucket stood beside it. And sitting on the mattress, curled inward like a child terrified of the dark, was the missing girl. Her hair was tangled. Her sweater looked worn. She faced the wall, knees against her chest, rocking ever so slightly. The camera lingered on her for an unsettlingly long time. No words, no sudden movement, just silent watching. Then the girl slowly turned her head toward the camera. Her eyes seemed distant, unfocused, hollow, as though she were trying to speak without sound. She whispered something, but the audio was too faint to decipher. A moment later, she lifted a piece of paper and held it toward the lens. It was blank. The camera zoomed in, shakily. The girl's breathing quickened. She mouthed the same word again and again, still inaudible. Then, abruptly, the footage cut to black. What came next was worse. A new scene flashed. The stage of the theater dimly lit. The girl now stood center stage. She appeared exhausted, trembling, swaying as though unable to balance. A tall figure stood behind her, its shape faint, mostly hidden in shadow. No face, no voice, just presence. The footage ended there, grainy, incomplete, damaged beyond restoration. The team reviewing the material was shaken. Some believed it was a hoax made to look authentic. Others insisted it was real. The detective knew only one thing. The footage confirmed the girl had been alive after her disappearance. When the girl's mother viewed the silent clip, she fainted. Her father broke down, repeatedly asking, why didn't she run? Why didn't she scream? But the girl's expression told a different truth. She was far too scared to even try. Authorities now believed they might be dealing with a calculated abduction. and that the theater was only one part of a larger plan. News of the footage leaked. Whispers spread. Some said the figure in the shadows resembled a former theater employee who vanished after the fire. Others claimed it was something else, something not entirely human. Fear spiraled. But the most chilling detail wasn't the shadowy figure or the stage silence. It was the blank sheet of paper the girl held, which, according to her parents, she used only when she felt someone was watching her. A message was there, meant to be seen, but erased before the camera rolled. Someone didn't want the truth written down. They wanted it recorded only in silence. The release, unofficial, whispered, fragmented, of the theater footage hit the town like a quiet lightning strike. Most residents didn't see the full video, yet description spread fast, twisted by fear into something much darker. A girl trapped beneath a theater, a figure lurking behind her, a blank page lifted like a plea. Even though authorities tried to suppress public speculation, panic crept into daily life. People stopped lingering outside past dusk. Windows that once stayed open through summer nights now stayed locked and shuttered. Children who once walked freely now moved in tight clusters, eyes constantly darting toward alley corners. The Royal Crest Theater became the nucleus of a growing storm. Some residents swore they saw lights flickering inside late at night. Others reported muffled footsteps echoing in the empty halls. A few panicked callers told police they heard a girl crying from within the building, only for officers to find silence when they arrived. The town's belief system fractured. A segment clung to rationality. They believed the girl was kidnapped by a disturbed person who used the theater as a hiding place. They suspected the shadowy figure was simply a man, perhaps a disgruntled former worker who knew the building's hidden rooms. But others whispered different theories. They spoke of the fire from years ago, one that supposedly killed several stagehands. Other projectionists rumored to linger in the building long after closing hours. Of the basement, unfinished, undocumented, built beneath public notice. Some even spoke of the footage being wrong, not just disturbing. A few claimed the figure behind the girl did not move like a person. It seemed too still, too tall, too blurred at the edges, like the darkness itself was shaping into a body. New sightings began flooding police lines. A girl seen walking roadside in the early morning, barefoot, wearing an oversized sweater. A figure standing unmoving in a field, vanishing when approached. A rusted truck parked behind a convenience store, idling without a driver in sight. But each time someone tried to verify these stories, there was nothing. No footprints, no tire tracks, no witnesses willing to stand by their claims. Support groups formed for the girl's family, yet many attended more for answers and comfort. Town hall meetings devolved into shouting. Locals demanding the theater be demolished immediately. The police hesitated. They needed evidence, but the community needed closure. Meanwhile, the investigator leading the case began to struggle privately. He replayed the footage nightly, obsessing over the blank paper. He tried enhancing the audio again and again, searching for the girl's whispered word. When slow, distorted frequencies emerged, too faint to trust, too human to ignore. It sounded like, not alone. Whether it was a message or a coincidental pattern was unclear, but the idea rooted itself deep in his mind. Someone else was involved. Someone whose shadow touched every part of the investigation. The family tried to stay strong, but they couldn't escape the feeling the girl was still close, somewhere nearby, alive or caught between worlds. Her younger brother swore he heard her voice outside his window one night, calling his name softly. When he ran outside searching, there was only cold air and the long, black outline of the Royal Crest beneath the moon. The town was being pulled in two directions, between truth and rumor, logic and terror. And somewhere in the middle of it all, a silent threat watched and waited, always one step ahead, just like before. Months after the town had been gripped by the initial discovery of the hidden theater footage, life in Redfield had settled into an uneasy rhythm of tension and rumor. The streets were quieter than they had been before the disappearance. Children stayed indoors, and adults walked with cautious wariness, scanning shadows and alleyways as if expecting them to spring to life. The girl's family remained tethered to the uncertainty, caught between hope that she might somehow return and the gnawing dread that she might never be found. It was against this backdrop of fragile normalcy that the next clue emerged. A group of teenagers, drawn by the thrill of exploration and the lure of the abandoned theater, ventured into the dense woods behind the building. They were the type of kids who had grown up on whispered rumors, ghost stories, and tales of the girl's disappearance. They knew they weren't supposed to be there. Yet the curiosity was irresistible. Rain had begun to fall in intermittent bursts, soaking the underbrush and turning the forest floor into a sticky mix of mud and fallen leaves. As they moved cautiously through the trees, one of them stumbled over something half buried in the wet earth. At first, they assumed it was debris, a forgotten piece of trash from years gone by. But as they brushed away the dirt, their breath caught. It was a small, rusted Super 8 camera, its casing worn with age yet remarkably intact. Despite the years, the reel inside seemed functional, a fragile vessel that had survived decades of neglect. Excitement and fear collided. They carried it to the authorities, who immediately recognized its potential significance. The detective, still obsessed with the theater footage, understood that this might finally provide a direct line to the events that had transpired within the theater's walls. Specialists carefully handled the film, treating it like an artifact while simultaneously preparing to digitize the fragile footage. The first screening took place in a dimly lit room, the hum of the projector filling the silence. From the outset, the footage was disorienting, the shaky, unsteady camera capturing a forest heavy with shadows and rain. Branches scraped across the lens, creating fleeting patterns that seemed almost deliberate, guiding the viewer's attention toward a theater at the edge of the woods. The camera operator's movements were rushed, almost stumbling, suggesting urgency, fear, or both. As the camera approached the theater, the faint flicker of light inside was visible. The building's broken marquee appeared distorted to the lens, a silent signal that something within demanded scrutiny. And then the basement appeared, a familiar setting, yet different from previous recordings. The girl was no longer sitting on the mattress as she had been before. She was standing, rigid, listening intently. Her body radiated tension, her fingers clenching at the edges of her sleeves. Every movement was cautious, deliberate, suggesting awareness of an unseen observer. The detective's pulse quickened. For the first time, he realized the girl had been attempting to communicate something more than fear. She had been attempting to warn anyone, of the presence she had endured. The distorted audio captured a faint whisper. "He's not done." It was a phrase that would haunt the investigation for weeks. The detective listened repeatedly, isolating frequencies, slowing playback, trying to extract clarity. The words were soft, almost drowned by environmental noise, yet unmistakable. They suggested continuation, escalation, a lurking presence that remained active and aware. Then came the paper. The girl lifted a sheet in front of her, this one not blank but scrawled with hurried handwriting. Not finished. The simplicity of the words belied their significance. She was telling the world, or the person viewing the footage, that the ordeal was ongoing, that her disappearance was part of a larger plan that had yet to conclude. The camera shifted violently as a thud echoed in the basement. The girl flinched, dropping the paper. The lens swiveled toward a doorway, revealing a silhouette, tall, imposing, unmoving, filling the exit. Unlike prior glimpses, this figure radiated control and menace. It was a reminder that the threat was not passive. It was present, aware, and strategically patient. The reel then descended into chaos. The camera shook as the girl moved, fragments of the basement floor and corners captured, interspersed with glimpses of her trembling hands and sweater. Her breathing grew more pronounced, layered with a deeper, heavier rhythm. The shadow's presence, close and deliberate, audible even without visual confirmation. The frame cut to static, leaving nothing but anticipation and dread. The detective spent endless nights analyzing every frame, every subtle gesture, every pattern of movement. He noted the girl's navigation of hidden passages, her strategic pauses, the deliberate avoidance of obstacles. It became clear that her survival depended on keen awareness, intellect, and intuition, qualities amplified under extreme duress. He realized she had left breadcrumbs not for investigators, but for anyone who might follow, encoded within her movements, her gestures, and the small, scrawled messages. When the police revisited the theater basement, they found changes. Walls had been scraped clean, the mattress removed, every trace of the girl's presence meticulously erased. And yet, a small scrap of paper remained, almost overlooked, bearing the same words in the film, "Not finished." It became a chilling testament. The perpetrator had returned after the police search, not to harm, but to assert control, to signal that the game was ongoing and that the town, the investigators, and the girl's family were all players in a carefully orchestrated narrative. Redfield, already fractured by fear and rumor, was pushed further into anxiety. The town's collective imagination worked against logic, each unexplained noise, shadow, or fleeting figure reinforcing dread. Parents clutched children closer, friends avoided each other's eyes, and streets emptied long before nightfall. Even the detective, obsessive and determined, began to feel the oppressive weight of this psychological warfare. Every replay of the footage reinforced the notion that the girl's ordeal was meticulously planned, her survival both remarkable and frightening in its implication. The girl's family faced an unrelenting tension, balancing hope with terror. The youngest sibling claimed to hear her whispers on quiet nights. The mother combed every corner of the house, imagining footsteps, shadows, and hidden observers. The father oscillated between rationality and despair, trying to make sense of an ordeal that defied comprehension. Redfield, once a town of comfort and routine, had been transformed into a landscape of uncertainty. Fear had physical form in every alley, empty street, and silent house. The girl's survival, though probable, remained shrouded in the mystery of the figure in the shadows, the hidden messages, and the calculated manipulations that had defined her disappearance. In the end, the second discovery, the Super 8 camera, the whispered words, the scrawled notes, was not simply evidence. It was a mirror reflecting the depth of human fear, ingenuity, and resilience. It revealed a girl not merely surviving, but actively shaping her path through a labyrinth of terror, leaving fragments for those who might understand. The message was hauntingly clear. Her story was unfinished, the threat still present, and the town of Redfield would remain caught in the tension between fear and revelation until the final truths emerged. The tip about Eldon Pierce had arrived like a lifeline, a tangible name after months of chasing shadows, false leads, and whispers of the unknown. For weeks, the investigation had felt like wading through fog. Every sighting, every fleeting clue, seemed simultaneously significant and meaningless. But the name of the former projectionist injected a clarity that both exhilarated and terrified the lead detective. Pierce had vanished after the theater fired decades earlier, leaving behind nothing but a trail of speculation and half-remembered stories. Now, decades later, his name surfaced again in the context of a girl who had disappeared without a trace. Pierce was described as a man intensely private, meticulous in habits, with an almost obsessive attachment to the theater's projection room. Townspeople remembered him lingering in the dark long after the final show ended, whispering to himself, absorbed in the whirring of projectors. Some called him eccentric. Others called him unnerving. The detective pored over these accounts, trying to separate exaggeration from fact. But the eerie consistency of the stories only deepened suspicion. The search for Pierce became a carefully orchestrated operation. Officers combed the outskirts of Redfield, following every lead, speaking with anyone who might have seen him in the years since the fire. Days passed. Nights became stretches of surveillance, stakeouts, and quiet anticipation. Then, finally, they located him. A weathered trailer on the edge of town, surrounded by rusting scrap metal and discarded electronics. It was a place that seemed both forgotten and intentionally hidden, mirroring the elusive nature of the man himself. When authorities approached, Pierce did not flee. His pale eyes followed the officers silently as they stepped onto property. There was no confrontation, only the heavy weight of observation. His trailer was meticulously organized, with shelves of film canisters, projector parts, photographs of the theater's early days, and newspapers chronicling the fire. To the investigators, it was almost too perfect, the kind of collection someone might preserve if haunted by the past or obsessed with secrets long buried. Pierce's demeanor during questioning was calm yet tense, a quiet tremor barely perceptible beneath his composed exterior. He claimed to have no knowledge of the girl, insisting he had not returned to the theater since the fire. When pressed about the items in his trailer, he muttered only about unfinished work and things left behind. Each response was deliberately vague, providing neither confession nor clarity, but enough to ignite suspicion. Despite the lack of direct evidence, public perception immediately turned. Headlines branded him a monster. The town, already frayed by fear, rallied in judgment. Residents whispered about the girl's sweater, linking it to Pierce's known association with costumes and props. When a dusty crate in his storage locker contained clothing resembling items from the theater, the assumption seemed confirmed. Redfield exhaled, at least temporarily, convinced justice was finally within reach. But forensic analysis quickly dismantled that assumption. The sweater was traced to an entirely different person, someone long deceased. The crate held nothing more than remnants of the theater's costume department, preserved through decades. The detective realized with growing horror that the town's collective relief had been premature. Pierce was not their villain. He was a red herring, a distraction. And yet, the tension did not dissipate. While Pierce sat behind bars, police received a report of movement inside the theater. Responding officers found nothing, but a fresh scrap of paper had been left in the basement, weighted by a small stone. The message was clear and deliberate. Too late. Security footage confirmed Pierce had not left the cell, proving he could not have been the one responsible for the note. Pierce's terror became palpable when confronted with the news. The man who had seemed cold and detached trembled visibly, muttering, "You're chasing the wrong shadow." His confession, or rather warning, was partial, cryptic, and chilling. Investigators began to understand the depths of the deception. The real orchestrator of the girl's disappearance had outsmarted them at every turn, leaving Pierce as a convenient decoy. This revelation reshaped the investigation. Redfield's collective tension intensified, shifting from a single villain to an omnipresent, unseen force capable of manipulating perception, evidence, and fear. Townspeople grew more wary, locking doors and peering cautiously into shadows. Children became reluctant to speak, adults hesitant to venture outside after dark. Every sound, the scrape of a branch, a distant truck engine, footsteps on gravel, was interpreted as a signal from the unknown figure still orchestrating events. The detective revisited every witness account and piece of evidence, reanalyzing the patterns that led to Pierce. It became clear that the person responsible had deliberately used misinformation to manipulate the investigation, drawing attention away from the true labyrinthine plan at play. Each discarded clue, each subtle misdirection, had been calculated to guide investigators and townspeople toward the wrong suspect, amplifying fear while concealing the truth. Even the theater itself played a role in the psychological orchestration. Its hidden passageways, basements, and obscure architecture created the perfect environment for someone to control, manipulate, and observe without being seen. Shadows in hallways, the echoes of footsteps, and the occasional flicker of light were all tools to create disorientation, feeding the town's anxiety and reinforcing the sense that they were being watched at all times. The girl's family, already exhausted by months of uncertainty, experienced a complicated mixture of relief and dread. Pierce's release did not resolve their fear. It magnified it. If not him, then who? Who had observed her, confined her, and controlled her environment so meticulously? The unanswered questions became a persistent ache, one that even the passage of time could not dull. The investigation had revealed something fundamental. The disappearance was far more sophisticated than anyone had anticipated. It was not a crime of opportunity, but of strategy and foresight. Whoever orchestrated understood human behavior, the investigative process, and the power of fear. Every step the detective and his team took seemed anticipated, every assumption countered by careful manipulation. Redfield itself seemed caught in the grip of this invisible hand. The town's fabric had frayed, not from Pierce's presence, but from the unseen entity that had orchestrated the girl's disappearance and orchestrated the town's psychological unraveling. Residents began to navigate the town as though on edge, avoiding the theater entirely, moving in pairs or groups, whispering warnings, and monitoring neighbors as closely as the streets themselves. Fear had become communal, tangible, almost as real as any physical presence. Even months later, the investigation remained unresolved in critical ways. Pierce had been released, yet the notes, the hidden passages, the subtle manipulations, everything indicated the perpetrator remained at large. And each cryptic message, each carefully placed note, reinforced a terrifying truth. The girl's disappearance was part of a long, deliberate plan, one designed not only to confine her, but to control the narrative, manipulate perception, and terrorize an entire community. The lead detective, exhausted, began documenting every detail obsessively, reconstructing events, reviewing footage, cross-referencing witness accounts, and mapping possible movements within the theater. Each day brought new insights, yet the overarching puzzle remained elusive. Who had orchestrated this disappearance with such precision? How many clues were genuine, and how many were red herrings designed to manipulate the investigation? It became painfully clear. Pierce had been a convenient scapegoat, a man with an eerie connection to the theater but no real involvement in the girl's disappearance. The true orchestrator had remained hidden, always one step ahead, using architecture, timing, and psychological manipulation to maintain control. The town's fear, the family's anguish, the detective's obsession, all had been anticipated and exploited. By the end of this phase of the investigation, one sobering conclusion emerged. The missing girl's ordeal had not ended with Pierce's arrest and release. It continued in the shadows, in the silent spaces of the theater, in the minds of the investigators, and in the collective consciousness of Redfield itself. The pursuit of truth had revealed not only the limits of human perception, but also the terrifying reality that the most dangerous presence is often the one that cannot be seen, touched, or easily understood. The town, the detective, and the girl's family now understood an essential truth. The disappearance was far from over. The real orchestrator was still at large, still manipulating, still watching. And Redfield would never be the same. The release of Eldon Pierce was a turning point that no one in Redfield was ready for. For weeks, the town had pinned its hopes on his arrest, quietly convincing themselves that the nightmare might finally end. But his release shattered that fragile sense of closure like glass underfoot. Overnight, the town felt smaller, suffocating even, as if the streets themselves were closing in. Fog rolled in earlier than usual, sticking to ground and curling around telephone poles, street signs, and the tips of trees. The townspeople began locking doors at times when they once felt safe walking freely. Windows, once thrown open to catch the summer breeze, were now tightly shut and curtains drawn tightly against the night. Conversations in Redfield became tense, hushed, and suspicious. Mothers warned their children to avoid even looking at the abandoned Royal Crest Theater. Teachers noticed nervous glances from students who refused to venture too far from school grounds or linger in playground shadows. Even the elderly, who had weathered decades of Redfield's mundane life, whispered about strange figures glimpsed along the roadside, rustling behind trees, and vanishing before anyone could approach. The town's collective psyche had shifted, forever altered by the girl's disappearance and the subsequent revelations. Investigators returned to the theater repeatedly, their presence never deterred what seemed to be orchestrated disturbances. Footprints appeared and vanished. Scraps of paper showed up in the basement, and were gone within hours. Small signs suggested someone or something was always one step ahead. Officers who had entered the building alone at first reported unease, shadows moving in the corner of their vision, and the sense that they were being watched. They chalked it up to tension and exhaustion. But each successive officer, each search team, reported the same sensations. Fear had taken on a physical form within the theater's decaying walls. Meanwhile, the family endured a slow, unrelenting torture of uncertainty. Days blended into weeks. Every unexplained noise, every shadow glimpsed from a window, every unexpected knock at the door rekindled hope and terror. The mother, who once prided herself on composure, began pacing her living room at odd hours, glancing anxiously at the clock, imagining footsteps in the hallway. The father, usually calm and rational, became defensive, his voice tight with frustration whenever neighbors inquired about the investigation. The missing girl's younger brother frequently claimed he could hear her voice whispering his name outside his window late at night, soft, almost pleading. But when he ran to the source, there was nothing but the wind and the long silhouette of the theater beneath the moonlight. Redfield's sense of community fractured as panic spread. Neighbors who had once greeted each other warmly now passed with tight-lipped nods, eyes flicking toward every alley and empty lot. Rumors circulated faster than verified information. Some claimed to have seen her wandering along the outskirts of town. Others swore that the rusted pickup truck had returned to the roads late at night, idling in empty driveways or parked near the woods. Fear became cyclical. Evidence, whether credible or imagined, fed the imagination, and imagination fed the fear. At the police station, the lead detective became consumed by the recurring messages from the girl herself. Not finished and too late. He spent sleepless nights alone in the darkened review room, headphones pressed over his ears, replaying footage frame by frame. He noticed subtle details that others missed. A fleeting glance toward a corner, a barely audible breath, a shadow stretching longer than it should have. He traced the film sequences obsessively, reconstructing movements, memorizing angles, imagining the girl's perspective. Each viewing deepened his obsession. Each clue, each whispered word, only created more questions than answers. Investigators reviewed witness accounts meticulously. Some townspeople had claimed to see a figure in the woods near the theater, its shape elongated, almost unreal. Others described hearing the faintest cries, so soft that they could have been wind, but the source was never identified. Footprints along the dirt roads leading to the theater appeared overnight and vanished just as quickly, leaving no trace for forensic analysis. One officer reported that, when alone in the building, he could hear the faint scraping of metal as though someone was shifting a ladder or adjusting equipment, only to find nothing in the room. In addition to the physical anomalies, psychological ones began manifesting in Redfield's residents. Children refused to play outside. Adults grew irritable, suspicious of neighbors who lingered too long. Even the town's animals, dogs, cats, birds, became restless. They would bark at empty spaces, hiss at the wind, or refuse to enter areas near the theater. The community's rhythm had been disrupted, replaced with heightened alertness and paranoia. Despite these terrors, the lead detective pressed forward, increasingly isolated in his obsession. He rewatched every frame of the hidden footage, cataloged every whispered word, and cross-referenced the messages. He analyzed the shadows, the reflections, the sound of breathing, the direction of the girl's gaze. Slowly, patterns emerged, a sequence of movements, a hidden route within the theater, subtle hints about her attempts to escape. Each detail was painstakingly noted, but always just out of reach of certainty. The detective's obsession mirrored the town's fear. Redfield seemed to shrink around the missing girl's absence. Public life slowed. Businesses closed early. Community events were postponed indefinitely. People avoided discussing the case publicly, fearing the words themselves might summon attention from whatever had orchestrated the girl's disappearance. Meanwhile, the family struggled under the relentless weight of attention and uncertainty. The mother's panic attacks grew more frequent. The father's health deteriorated from sleepless nights and constant worry. Friends and neighbors offered help but were met with either polite refusals or bitter defensiveness. Their grief had become private, and yet impossible to hide. Every sound, every shadow, every rumor served as a reminder of the girl's absence. The theater itself became a symbol of unresolved terror. Even in daylight, its decaying marquee cast long shadows across the sidewalk. Its broken doors seemed to breathe in the wind. Locals swore the building's presence felt alive, as though the walls themselves retained memory of what had occurred inside. Every night, someone in town claimed to see a flickering light in a basement window, though investigations proved none existed. Each reported sighting reinforced the town's growing sense of doom. It was as if the missing girl's disappearance had not been an isolated event, but the catalyst for a psychological contagion. Fear spread invisibly, infecting the town's collective consciousness. Redfield had been fractured, its people living under a constant, unspoken dread. Even years later, investigators, historians, and locals described this period as a time when the town seemed suspended between the known and the unknown. Daily routines were replaced by vigilance. Children's laughter was muted by fear. Streets became hollow, and night brought a quiet anticipation of unseen threats. Through it all, one fact remained undeniable. The girl's absence was more than just a disappearance. It had become a presence. An echo, a haunting thread woven into the town's very fabric, stretching across neighborhoods, classrooms, homes, and workplaces. Her disappearance was not a single event. It was an ongoing shadow, shaping thought, behavior, and the unspoken fears of everyone in Redfield. Even now, Decades later, the lingering presence of that night in 1973 continues to reverberate. Stories of strange sounds, fleeting shadows, and cryptic messages still emerge, a testament to the enduring psychological mark left on a town that was forever changed. Redfield remains haunted, not by ghosts, not by specters of the dead, but by the memory of what was lost, the fear of what was unseen, and the enduring mystery of a girl who vanished into silence, leaving only the echo of her absence. The discovery of the final hidden reels from the Royal Crest Theater marked the turning point that the entire town had been waiting for. Though no one knew how much they were truly prepared for what lay ahead, for months, the investigation had stalled, shifting between dead ends and unverified sightings, each twist leaving Redfield more tense and fragmented than before. The girl's family, racked by grief and anxiety, clung to hope in small, private moments, while the town collectively wrestled with fear, suspicion, and rumor. When the film historian informed the lead detective that several reels had been archived in a small warehouse outside town, including one ominously labeled "Do Not View," it felt like a universe had provided a sliver of clarity, but no one could have anticipated the weight of the truth contained within those frames. From the first moment of the footage, the theater appeared almost alive, bathed in a dim, flickering light that seemed to pulse with its own rhythm. Dust hung in the air like suspended memories, each beam cutting through it, revealing details both mundane and haunting. Empty seats sagged beneath decades of neglect, the stage curtains torn and frayed. For a brief moment, the camera lingered on the floorboards, scarred and creaking as though they had absorbed the whispers of every past performance, and now carried the echoes of the girl's footsteps. The viewer could almost hear her breathing as she cautiously navigated the long-abandoned corridors. The footage quickly shifted to the basement. Unlike previous recordings, this reel had been filmed with multiple angles, suggesting the presence of someone intimately familiar with the building. The girl's movements were deliberate yet cautious. She hesitated at corners, listened intently, and occasionally glanced over her shoulder as though expecting to see someone or something emerging from the shadows. Her body language revealed terror intertwined with determination, the subtle rhythm of hope and fear dancing across her features. At one point, she discovered a narrow, hidden passageway concealed beneath a loose section of the basement floor. The camera followed her carefully, capturing every tentative step as she descended. Dust swirled in the stale air, catching in her hair and on the shoulders of her worn sweater. The detective noticed a faint, almost imperceptible trembling of her hands as she touched the walls, mapping them for stability. Every detail emphasized her resourcefulness. A girl forced into ingenuity by fear, navigating a space that no one else knew existed. The most haunting frame appeared when the girl reached a cracked mirror propped against the far wall. The reflection behind her revealed a tall figure, obscured by darkness, silent and motionless. For the first time in the investigation, the footage confirmed what had been suspected. Someone had been watching her all along. Not an abstract threat, not a shadowy rumor, but a calculated observer, strategically positioned to control her environment, monitoring her every movement. The tension was unbearable, and the detective found himself gripping the edges of his chair, knowing that this footage revealed more than a location. It revealed intention. As the girl navigated a hidden passage, she found evidence of previous occupants. Faint scuff marks, old newspaper clippings, and discarded items suggesting that others had once sought refuge or imprisonment in these same corridors. Each item told a story of confinement, survival, and human resilience under duress. In one frame, she paused to study a small bundle tucked in a corner, a sweater, dirt-stained but recognizable as belonging to a child from years prior. Her expression softened, if only momentarily, before fear overtook her again, reminding the viewer that hope in these halls was fleeting. The camera captured her approach to what appeared to be an exit, a door partially hidden behind stacked crates. She hesitated, listening, before pushing it open. A faint glow spilled in from the outside, a promise of liberation after weeks, or perhaps months, of torment. As she stepped through, the camera focused on the empty basement, lingering longer than necessary. The silence was deafening, punctuated only by the soft creak of floorboards settling. And then the frame cut to black. Though the footage ended, the implications were staggering. For the first time, investigators realized that the girl had not been permanently abducted or harmed beyond the bounds of confinement within the theater. She had survived. She had navigated a labyrinth that had eluded generations of searchers. And most importantly, she had exercised agency, the first real glimmer of control she had possessed since the disappearance. The detective revisited the reel again and again, noticing subtleties others missed. The girl's pacing, the direction of her gaze, the faint pattern of light that guided her path. Each viewing revealed more about her thought process, her courage, and the calculated precision she employed to evade detection. Even the smallest gestures, clutching the sweater, pausing at the mirror, spoke volumes about her mental state, an intricate portrait of fear tempered by resilience. Word of the discovery traveled through Redfield slowly. Rumors, for once, were tinged with awe. Some townspeople, previously consumed by terror, expressed relief tempered by disbelief. They struggled to reconcile the girl's survival with the months of tension, the countless reports of shadows, footsteps, and fleeting glimpses. For the first time, the town's narrative shifted from one of fear to one of cautious hope. The girl's family, when shown the footage, experienced a storm of emotions: grief, relief, anger, and finally, profound awe. They realized that her absence had not been a failure on anyone's part, but testament to her resilience in the face of circumstances no one had imagined. The detective, too, understood that the theater's labyrinthine design, combined with a calculated observation by an unknown figure, had created a near-impossible environment from which she had emerged not only alive, but remarkably aware and resourceful. Though the town could now celebrate her survival in theory, the scars remained. Redfield had been forever altered by the events surrounding the theater. Streets carried the memory of panic. Homes carried the echo of whispered warnings. Children carried an unspoken awareness of lurking danger. The theater itself remained a symbol of both confinement and escape, a monument to the girl's ingenuity and the shadow of whoever had orchestrated her ordeal. The hidden footage, finally revealed, provided closure without fully answering every question. The identity of the observer, the full extent of their plans, and the precise timeline of her captivity remained partially obscured. Yet one undeniable truth emerged. The girl had survived, navigated the labyrinth, and left the theater alive. Redfield, though scarred, could begin to breathe again. The truth, exposed in frames of flickering light and shadow, had illuminated the darkness. The theater had held her, tested her, and ultimately, though inadvertently, had demonstrated the resilience of the human spirit. And as the detective watched the final frames one last time, he realized something profound. The girl's story was more than a tale of disappearance. It was a testament to courage under pressure, intelligence under fear and the quiet, indomitable will to survive against unimaginable odds. The theater had revealed its secrets, but only those willing to look closely could see the full measure of what had transpired.